Today I'll be talking about JavaScript for beginners. And yeah, let's go. I'll be using JSFiddle.net. In this environment, if you click in the top right settings, you can adjust the layout. I'm using classic, but you can choose other kind of layouts if you don't like this one. Okay, so HTML is for the structure of a document, while CSS for the style and visuals. Now, JavaScript is to make things interactive. We used to have very static websites in the early days, but now they're very interactive and we have social media apps and all this stuff. So a lot of JavaScript is involved in that. So how can we start? Let me make a paragraph here in HTML. So we have the HTML panel here where I can write HTML. We have the CSS panel where I can type some CSS, and here I have the JavaScript one. And if I click run in the top left, I can see the results of my code. So we have a paragraph. So if I wanted to change the color in CSS, I could simply do, if I want to target all the paragraphs, make them red, I would do it like this. That's cool, but how can we do this with JavaScript? So let me show you. So first of all, in JavaScript, first you gotta always target the element you wanna manipulate. So the paragraph, that's what we want to manipulate. Now we need a way to find this element in the whole document. Remember, I'm doing things very simple here. There's only one element, but an actual real page has many, many, many elements, some of them nested inside others, and so on. So I need some kind of identifier to find this. And the easiest way I can do is if I add an ID attribute to this paragraph. Let's call it paragraph. And go to the JavaScript. So in JavaScript, there are things called objects, and one of them is the document. If you want to ask the document to do something for you, you can type document dot. So an object is like, real world object. It has attributes like a car has attributes, right? Its color, its make, and so on, what year. Now the car also has some things you can operate on, like you can drive the car, right? You can turn the engine on. You can turn the, windshield wipers and so on, air conditioner. So we're going to ask the document to operate on something. So we're going to get element by ID. So these things are called functions because they do something for us. The function name is get element by ID. And it's important that the naming be exactly like that with the first G lowercase. And then the word element, the first letter is uppercase. And by and ID also uppercase, the first letter. This is called the camel case naming convention. So we need to type exactly like that. Otherwise, it won't work. So continuing here, document get element ID. Every time you have a function, you have to type parentheses, open and close. And then within that, we can pass optionally things to the function. In this case, okay, I need to get an element by ID. I need to know what ID. So that's what the argument here is. Now, the argument is what we type for the ID attribute value for the P. So we can use that like this, but I need to add either single or double quotes surrounding it. Because if I don't have that, it's going to think it's something else. If you want the literal word paragraph to appear there, you need the quotes. Okay, and these things are called strings. Strings are sequences of characters. Okay, so every time there are quotes surrounding some sequence of characters, that's a string. Okay, so when we say, okay, document, which is kind of represents the whole document here, I need something, and I say dot. So this get element by ID belongs to document. So it's one operation we can do. This function get element by ID, once given an argument, in this case, the ID of this element, paragraph, it's going to return us literally a reference, or think of it like as a hook. That's tied to this element here. So we can operate on that. And one of the attributes of this paragraph, it's actually an object as well, HTML element, is that it has dot style. Okay, dot style is like all the CSS properties of this thing. And the other, you can say dot color like that. Now, if you just say like this, you're going to access the color style of this paragraph element. Now, if I want to change anything with JavaScript, in general, we have left-hand side is the thing you want to change, and equal sign, right-hand side is the new value. In this case, let's add red within double quotes or single quotes, either way. Now, this is also called a string of 3 characters. I got R, E, and D. And the equal sign is an attribution or assignment operator here. Now, the space between them, you don't need to have that. It's something I just add for style because I think it's better visually, but you don't have to have that. Remember, left-hand side is the thing we're going to change. In this case, the color of the style of the P element. So I'm going to click run in the top left, and I can see as soon as it runs, the paragraph is now in color red, if you can see the color red. Now what happens is it loads this document, HTML, and then it runs the code in the JavaScript part. Initially, the paragraph is going to be, the standard color default that's black, but it's very quick that it runs the JavaScript code, so you don't even notice that it turned red. Okay, and that's nice. Let's try another property. Let's say I want to change the background color. Let's say I want to change it to maybe yellow. So I would follow the same process. It's nothing tricky here. You're going to type almost exactly the same thing, except you're going to change color for background color, and the right-hand side is going to be yellow. So first, we got to always go through the document. So document. Now I need something out of it. Dot get element by ID. Parentheses, it's a function. All functions need parentheses to be called. It has one argument, and that's the ID, the string, paragraph. Now, this gives us or returns, the function always returns something back to you. And that something is the HTML element B. Now we can say, okay, dot style to access the object that contains all the CSS properties. And we can say dot background color. Now we notice I type background color in camel case. CSS is background dash lowercase color. But when we write JavaScript, the naming convention is always camel case. So you're going to have to write it like this, without the dash, and the C has to be capitalized. Now we want to assign a new value. So we always say equal sign, and then right-hand side is always the new value. And I'm going to say yellow. Don't forget the quotes, either single quotes or double quotes at the beginning and the end of the sequence of characters. Now we can see it added the background color yellow to this paragraph element. And so it goes on. You can pretty much change any CSS property. You just change style dot whatever here. And I'll always make sure to convert from the dashed case to the camel case if you're trying to do something in JavaScript. Okay, nice. Now, let's do something more fun. I'll add a generic container here, a div. And it's just a block element. And what I'm going to do is I want to set some properties here. Let me say div background color. See, I'm using dash because I'm typing CSS right now. Let's make it green. And then the width, let's try 100 pixels and the height 100 pixels. So I made a square out of this div. Now, what I want to do is when I click the square, I want first you already know how to change the color, right? I already taught you. You can add an ID. It works with any element, doesn't matter, paragraph, div, whatever. Add an ID, document element by ID, pass the ID as the argument, and then say dot style, the color, background color, in this case, equals whatever. Now, how can we do that when we click? When you're on a web page, you're clicking everywhere, many things, right? So it's very interactive in the sense that when it clicks, it senses that you clicked it. and it will react to it and do something. Now I want to do the following. I want to click this square, and I want the color to change to red, the background color. How would we do that in JavaScript? Okay, so one way is here give an attribute to the div. Let's call it onClick. So these are called events, okay, in JavaScript. And then double equals and give it a value. Now the value has to be a function, okay, which is a set of instructions that we're going to write for something to happen when we click this element. Let's call change color. Now all functions we need to call it in this case. So I put two open close. So we're going to see why is that. So I'm going to go to the JavaScript tab here. I'm going to say function word space. Now I'm going to use the same name I use here for the onClick and the parentheses because it's a function. Now every function body needs the curly braces here. So we type the instructions between the open and close curly braces. So this is just syntax. JavaScript is a programming language. So we just follow their syntax. This is just how things have to be. You have to type the keyword function space and then the name, any name you want. And notice I use the camel case naming convention. You don't have to use it, but that's pretty much the standard that we always follow. And then the function can take arguments. In this case, there's none, so I leave the open and close parentheses empty. And finally, we can have the body or the instructions of the function between the open and curly braces. I don't have to have space here. It's just optional, but I like to have it for better visuals. And whenever I open a curly brace, usually programming, we add what's called indentation, which is just spaces at the left-hand side. For example, I usually use 2 spaces. So you're going to see that a lot. And then when I reach the closing curly brace, I continue writing from the same level, vertically. In any case, so I want to be able to target this div. Now I can give an ID. Let's give it an ID. I just call it the square. Now here I'm going to say document dot get element by ID. The ID here is square. Has to match the same ID value attribute here for the div. Now, once we get that, we can finally change the dot style, dot background color. Oops. And remember, to assign new value, equals sign, and then right-hand side, the new value. Let's say it's red, right? And, I put a semicolon here. It's optional in JavaScript, but I usually like to place it. Usually in programming languages, many of them, when you finish a statement, you finish with a semicolon. Okay? Now I'm going to click run. Nothing happens, right? But I click the div and turn red. Now let me click run in the top left to reset. Now why does that happen? Well, we have the onClick attribute passed to this div, which means, okay, when I click anywhere within this square, I want to call the function change color. The parentheses here is important because you want to call or execute the instructions for change color. Since we define change color in the JavaScript section here, it's going to go and run every instruction between the open and closing curly brace. In this case, this instruction here is to change the background color of that div whose ID is square to red. So if I click that, it becomes red. So that's called, these are called events. So there are many kinds of events. This one is click, but there could be, you're typing something in a form and you move your cursor away from the form, control the input and so on. Or you move the mouse over an element, outside an element. All of these are events. You can have an event for the form submission. You can have the event when you press the key down and so on. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Could you go over that just one more time, a little quick?
Yeah. Is there a specific part you don't understand, or
just the entire function?
Once you add an attribute, in this case onClick, to the element, what's going to happen is when I click that element, it's going to try to see what to do. Okay, you give me something to do when I click. And that something is what we call a function. We can call or execute a function. A function is a set of instructions that you can write so that the computer can do. So in this case, I say, okay, the name of the function here is change color. And the parentheses are necessary because they are mean execute or call this function. And we define the function in the JavaScript panel here. To define a function, you have to write the word function, space, and then the name of the function. Now, this name has to match the same name we gave in the value for onClick. And then you define the rest of the function. By definition of JavaScript syntax, the arguments are things you can give to a function if it needs anything at all. This one doesn't need anything, therefore we leave the open and closing empty, meaning I don't have to write anything inside, right? So I can just leave it empty. Now, the instructions are always placed between the open curly brace and the closing curly brace. So I can write whatever here as long as within the open and close. And all these lines will be executed the moment I see the function name and the parentheses, the computer sees, right? So when I click, okay, let me reset. Click, okay, call change color, goes here, okay, change color, starts from the top, do this line, and then it changed the color. And once it reaches the curly brace here, the end curly brace, the function is done, it's over. That's it, I don't need to do anything else. Obviously here I just want to have one thing to do, but I could have instructor number 2, another instructor here, a fourth instructor here, and so on. So what I would do is go line by line from the top. Okay, do this one, then once I'm done, do the following one. Okay, do A, and then do D, and then do R. Okay, I reached the end. This is the curly brace marking the end of the function body. I'm done, and that's it. Obviously, this is a very silly thing I'm kind of doing, but I could write in CSS. Yes, I can write in CSS, but I wanted to demonstrate how you can manipulate the document to your own liking, okay, using JavaScript. All right, I'm gonna go on. Now, to do the image gallery thing, I need to introduce the concept of variables. Remember how we had before for the paragraph? ID paragraph. The paragraph. And I was changing the properties, and I wrote it twice. One for the color, one for the background color yellow. You can see the paragraph. Oops. Paragraph, paragraph, paragraph. Okay, you can see the paragraph there. Notice I wrote the same thing twice, right? Which would be kind of tedious if I keep writing the same thing over and over. So if you don't want to write the same thing, you can actually store this value somewhere to be reused over and over. And that's the concept of variables. So the syntax is const space, oops, all lowercase. Any name you want, let's say paragraph element, and then double equals, and then the right-hand side is what you want to assign to this variable. Let me copy this. So let's walk through this. So whatever is returned by get element by ID, in this case, the P, we can store that somewhere to reference later. And to do that, we do use variables. So I created this variable, I call it paragraph element. You can call it any name you want. The syntax is, like I said, you have an equal sign. The right-hand side is the new value, and the left-hand side is what you want to assign to. Now we need to have the const because that's the syntax for JavaScript. Const meaning this is something constant that is only defined once. Once we have this name, we can reference anywhere we want. So in this case, line 3, when I say, I can have the, you see it's the same thing in the right-hand side, right? So I can replace this whole thing with just paragraph element. Okay, notice there's no quotes around it because this does not mean literally like the word paragraph element. This means something special, and that something special is the paragraph element variable that stores a reference or pointer, something that's pointing to the paragraph element here. Okay, so that's why before I told you about strings, that if you want the literal word red, for example, you have to have the quotes. Otherwise, it would think, oh, it's trying to think, where's the variable called red? I don't see it defined anywhere previously. Okay, so you always have to have quotes around it if you want the literal word read. Now, you see, we did line 4, the same thing. So we can just reuse that variable. So what happens is here, more details, is it always runs the program from the top to the bottom, right? So we're in line 1, and okay, we get the element by ID, and we put that inside paragraph element. Now, the benefit of doing this is we only do this operation once, whereas if you had this here, line 3, line 4, it would try to find the element once. It would try to find the element again twice. So it's doing 2 separate operations. Whereas if I have the variable, I only did it once, and I don't need to do that operation again. Go through the document, search for that element. And that's another benefit of variables. When you want to reuse values, you don't have to compute them again or do an operation again. Also helps with readability. If you name your variables a very descriptive name, so usually you want to give a very descriptive name for the thing you're storing to actually mean it, right? Don't write just, oh, okay, I'm going to write variable A and then say a.sire, a.color. What is A? This is not a good name because when you read it, you don't understand what it is. You have to dig through it and take a lot of time just to understand what this means. That's why we always want to give descriptive names to variables so we understand right away what they mean. And actually, we could also use this here in this function. That's totally fine. I'll teach you another way of practicing JavaScript if you open your browser developer tools. The hotkey is usually F12. Press F12. Or if you cannot open that, right-click anywhere in the browser, press Inspect. Okay. And then we can click the console tab here and start writing JavaScript, actually. You see, this is a prompt. And you can start writing JavaScript. You can actually do like 1 + 2, 3, 3 times 4, and so on. This is just JavaScript running computations for you. Okay, we can define strings, like we did, hello. And it just returns you back the same thing. You can make variables like we did, const, paragraph, text, hello world. And if I say paragraph text, it gives me back what I stored. So I can write it many times. It always gives me back what was stored. Be very careful when you're writing all these code. Every character matters. The case matters. If it's uppercase, lowercase, if there's a punctuation, everything is very, strict and it matters. Okay, I'm going to continue because we need to get through arrays. So when I want to store, I taught you how we can store one thing, like I said here, paragraph text. I can store a string. You can also store numbers. Let's say A equals 3. And if I say A, notice I omitted const here, but usually you need to add that, okay? It's just because we're in this environment of, type something, get something back. So that's A. It's always going to give me back 3. So I can say, okay, let B be 4. So whenever I say B is 4, right? So if I say A star B, that gives me back A, which is a variable that stores the value 3. Therefore, you can think of it as, okay, go whatever A is storing, I'm going to place it here, 3. Okay, now B is another variable. It stores the value 4. So whatever B is storing, I place it here. Now I can do the operation, 3 times 4, and I get back the 12. So if I revert and have A star B, that's 12. Obviously, I like to add space before and after the operator. In this case, the operator is the star, the multiplication. That's just for style or visuals. I think it's better to visualize with the eye. It's the same thing. Okay, so variables store something. Now, what if we have a collection or list of many things? Obviously we can create a variable for each, right? Okay, I'm going to say A is something, B is something, C is something. But that's kind of tedious. Isn't there a way we can group them all together into one single variable? Those are called arrays, okay? So if I say list equals, And the notation here is square brackets. Add the open and closing square brackets. And then within that, you can type the list separated by comma. For example, I can type 3, comma, 4, and then comma, I don't know, 7. If I do that, I get back what's called an array. You can see here, array. And the browser is so nice that you can kind of do this thing of unfold and see, okay, 3, 4, and 7. Now, an array, it's kind of like a sequence of things grouped together. And okay, but how can I access each thing? These things are called elements, okay? In this case, we have an array called a variable called list that holds an array of 3 elements. The first element being 3, the second element being 4, and the third being 7. Now, if you want to access any of them, you have to say first the name of the variable, followed by square brackets, and then you have to give the index of the element. Now, every element has an index, but you have to count it from 0, okay? We don't count it from 1. It's 0. So if you want the first element, you have to say 0. So when I say list, square brackets, with the 0 between, that gives me back the first element of the array. That's 3. If I want the second element, okay, that has to be, okay, 0 and then 1. 1 is the second, right? Index 1. So I say list, square brackets, 1. That gives me 4. And then the third element has to be, list subs 2. It's always -1, right? Because we always count from 0. Let me make this bigger so you can see the array there. Okay, so those are arrays. If you want to count how many elements they are in an array, obviously here I can see it's visually it's 3, but within the computer, you're not going to be able to see it visually. And the computer cannot rely on you to always be there to count it. So we can say list dot length. Remember the dots notation we saw before of document dot something? Yeah, so you can ask the array, hey, what's the length? By saying dot length. And it gives you three elements. So these are very basic access things we can do. Now, if you want to assign change some element, like remember, let's change the second element, which is index what? Second is 2, so 2 minus 1 is 1. So I can say list, brackets, 1. Now I can use this equal sign, and then the right-hand side is the new value. Let's say, make it 8. Now let's access list. You can see now that the second element's been changed to 8. Following the same pattern we learned before of the assignment operator here, the equal sign. The left-hand side is what you want to change. The right-hand side is the new value. Be careful with the equal sign here, because when we think of equal, we think of comparison, right? Something is equal to something else. But in this case, it's not a comparison. It's an assignment or attribution. You're assigning a new value to something. You're changing something to a new value. So be careful. There's always a difference. After you learn later on JavaScript, you're going to see 2 equal signs together, and that's a different thing. Okay, that's comparison. It's not assignment, but the single equal sign is assignment. Whenever you need to assign some new value to something, just do it like this. Okay, once we get this out of the way, okay, we got a question from Nada. How can we add more elements to the list? That's called a push operation, okay? So you can say list.push, and then parentheses. Push is a function, and it needs arguments within the parentheses, and you can add maybe like, let's say 1. What happens, it adds to the end of the array. So when I say list, I can see the 1 there. Okay, it's a push. You're pushing something to the end. Okay, it's always the same, usually the same pattern. You have something, you want to operate on that, dot, name of the operation, parentheses. If you need to give something, provide some additional information, you do so within the parentheses. Now let's talk about making a gallery. Let's delete everything here. I need an image. So, okay, I got one image here. So I'm going to add an image source here. Alt, that image. Now it's too big, so I want to give maybe width 100, height 1. Let it be changed automatically. Oh, that's a little bit bigger. There you go. I have a picture of a dog. So I posted in the Zoom chat the link I used, but you can find anywhere. Go on your search engine, find a picture, copy the URL from the address bar after you view the picture. Anyway, so I want to add a button here. Element button type button. And I want to say next image. And let me add a div so it goes to a new line, even though it's there because it's too, I want to make it in a new line. So just put a div there like that. Let me remove the CSS. I don't need that. There you go. Now we have an image, we have a button. So we need to implement, when I click the button, I want to change this image. Okay? I want to change it to this other image I'll show you right now. I pasted in the Zoom chat. How can we do that? Well, we learned how to listen to click events right before. What we do, okay, we need to find the element we want to listen for the click. In this case, the button. I can add on click attribute. And I can say here, the name of the function we want to call execute when we click the button. Okay. Let me say change image. And then we need open and close parentheses. Don't forget, because we're calling the function. Now we need to define the function in JavaScript, the function keyword space, name of the function, change image, parentheses, curly braces, and type the instructions between the open and closing curly brace. I like to add indentation, which is the 2 spaces to the left, just for style. You don't have to. But it looks nice, so I can see that all these statements are enclosed within this function body. When I say function body, I mean the things between the open and closing curly brace. Now, nice. How can we change this image to something else? Well, the attribute that controls the image is source, right? If we change source to something else here, like I go here and copy and paste, that changes it, right? But how can we do that in JavaScript? Well, first we have to select this image. Now, I taught you how to target or find this element by ID. Somebody asked for query selector. Query selector is another way of finding an element. So let me teach you how to do query selector. We're going to say document. Now I can say dot. Okay, what do you want out of the document? Well, I can say get element by ID. That's one way. Or I can do query selector. Query selector is a very convenient way of getting things. I wasn't going to talk about it, but since you asked about it, I'm talking. So it's always the same way. Call it with parentheses, and it needs the argument. It needs to know, okay, what do you want to select? Well, in this case, let's make it simple. I only have one image in this page. In the real world, it's be many images, so we wouldn't really do that, what I'm doing right now. But I'm just going to select by the name of the element, okay? And if you click run off, it's going to happen because this is grabbing that element here. Now, query selector is only used to grab one thing. There's another one called query selector all that grabs many things and kind of returns an array-like thing. Array, right? We just learned multiple things in one thing. So query selector for one thing. Now, once we got that, okay, I got the source, right? So I think we could just say, actually, let me teach you how you can figure it out. Can I teach you DevTools debugging? That might be hard. Let me do console, log this, and show you something. Let me see if I have the console here. One moment. It's kind of hard to see. Let me see if that's way too many things. Okay. Let me try. See if it works in the, no, it doesn't work there, only there. It's hard for me to do the thing I wanted to do because it's within this environment here. And anyway, I just wanted to show you that this is pointing to the element and a way to find out what attribute I would change. Let me search for an image of a dog here. So we have this dog, right? Let me open new image in a new tab. What I'm going to do is open the dev tools. I can inspect this. I can right click and let me see if it has something to do the variable. Yeah, let's use the query selector, document.query selector image. So you can see when I say document.query selector by the element name, it returns the image here. This image, we can go here. I press the up arrow in my keyboard and I can see dot. And there are many things it suggests out of this value that was returned. And I can look up for things that are of interest. So I can confirm if I scroll all the way up, these are all the properties and operations or functions we can do on this element. And I can confirm that, where is that? SRC, you see SRC? That's indeed here. So I can click that and write that down. And I can assign a new value. Obviously, I put ABC there, which doesn't mean anything. But let me put that other value that I pasted. There you go. Now that's a valid URL. So let me try to summarize here because maybe I might have gone too fast. We use document.query selector. We can query by the element name, as you can say img, and it will find the first img element on the document. And to that, we saw that we can find out what properties this thing has. And one of them is src, which is the same thing as the attribute for the element that we wrote in HTML. So if I want to change that, I can just do equal sign. Right-hand side is the new value. In this case, I changed the image source to be that of the cat. So this is precisely what we're going to do in our code. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our code. And I don't need this console log anymore because I showed you with the dev tools. So we're going to say, I want to change the source. Remember what we're doing here. We want to click next image, the button. So we want to change this image to the image of the cat. So I can say dot source. In this case, is going to be that URL of the cat, but I have to have what? Quotes around it, either single or double, doesn't matter in this case. And I always add semicolon just out of habit, but you don't need to. And when I click next image, it changes to the cat. Right? Remember, you could be Facebook, Instagram, whatever, or a news website. You often see these galleries, right? You click and another image appears, and click, another image appears. It's this same mechanism. We're just manipulating the source attribute of the image and change that to a new value. So the button has an onClick attribute that when we click, it calls the function change image that we wrote in JavaScript. So it goes here, okay, starts from the top. Okay, get element, not by ID, but I'm using query selector. We're gonna find, okay, go through all the whole document. The first element that's image, I want that to be returned. I got a reference to that. Okay, I'm gonna change the source attribute to the new URL. So somebody asks, would you keep writing semicolon to keep adding photos? Yes, so that's what we're going to do next. Of course, we could hard code all the things, but there are smarter ways to do about it. For example, how can we keep track of our image we are right now? That's the big problem here, right? We need to know which one it's going to be. So we're going to talk about that next. Javier asks, dot class is a class, correct? That depends on the context. If it's writing CSS, when you start with dot, that's a class. And also the query selector, you can actually write the same selector for CSS here. So if image, you had a class, say the image, you could actually do in the query selector dot, meaning find the element that has the class called the image. That's the same thing. If I click run, and I click, so it works the same way to select the element, right? An element can be found through many different means. You can find it by its name. You can find it by a class that it has, or an ID, or maybe an attribute, and so on. Does that make sense, Javier? All right. Okay, so how can we kind of click next right now? Nothing happens visually, right? But actually, we'll keep calling the same function every time I click, and it's changing the source to the same value. If I click, same value, click, same value, the cat. How can we kind of alternate that and change it to something else? Maybe change it back to the original. That's when arrays come into play here. Whenever you have lists of things, arrays come into play. That's why I had to teach you that. So let's create an array here outside of the body of the function. So I can go outside here. It can be either after it or before. Let's do before. So first, to create an array, square brackets. This means array. Now we can start writing the elements. Now the first element I want to write is the first image, which is the string for the dog. Now notice I wrote a string as the element of the array. When I taught you about arrays, I used numbers, right? But actually an array can hold any kind of data. Can be number, can be string, and other things. So the first element is going to be this string with the characters for the URL for that dog image. Now I want to add another element here. So I add a comma. And the second element is the cat. So I'm going to take this URL of the cat, copy and paste here. Remember the quotes because this is a string sequence of characters. Now, this is all in one line, and that's perfectly fine for the computer. But for us to visualize it, it's kind of hard. So I always like to break a line here. So one per line is easier to see. And usually what we do is we add indentation, that is some space to the beginning of the line, because that gives us a sense of kind of, okay, this thing is within the square brackets. There must be elements within the array. It's not required just for style, code style, so you can better see with your eyes. Okay, so this is an array, but we need it to store it somewhere so we can use it later. So to store things in an array, put the equal sign there, and then the left-hand side has to have the name of the variable. In this case, let's call images. It's rather a better name is image URL. I want to call image URLs, okay? Now URL is like it's the name, technical name, abbreviation for this thing, right? HTTP, whatever, for the address there. So that's why I call it that. Now we need const here because of syntax. Okay, this is a thing that we define once. We don't need to redefine it later. Okay, now I can access it from anywhere. So here, let's say I want to change that to use the array. Remember, this is an array of 2 elements. The second element is actually the same as this string I typed here in line 7. So how can I use that array, the second element? Remember, the name of the variable is image URLs. And then if I want to access something, I put square brackets and the index there. Now it counts from 0. So the first element is index 0. The second element, the one we want, is index 1. So I can say 1 there. So when I say this like this, what I'm doing is, okay, it's going to take, variable image URLs, it's an array. It's going to go here and, 0, 1, second element is going to take that and imagine it was being replaced here, right? The same thing we had before. Imagine. That's what it does. So if I click run, next image, the same thing happens, right? Nothing changed, even though we changed the code to use the element from the array, right? This string for the kitten. How are we doing so far? Any questions? Can we go over that one more time? Yeah. So right now I'm building some momentum for us to be able to alternate between the images. So in order to do that, I need to use arrays. Arrays is a data structure that allows you to store more than one thing consecutively, sequentially. So in this case, when we have square brackets, that's the punctuation that denotes, okay, we're going to make an array in the JavaScript programming language. So the first array can have many elements, right? The first element is this thing. And this thing can be a number, can be a string, whatever. Remember, string is a sequence of characters. Javier, wait, are you referencing line 1? What do you mean? I'm right here in line 2 in the JavaScript panel. And the first element is this string for the URL for the dog image. And then the second element, we separate them with a comma. Remember, we have the second element with the other string with the URL for the cat. So this thing is a list of two things, two elements. Okay, I'll explain that in a moment, what the brackets one mean. So we store this array in a variable that we call image URL so that we can use it later. So in this case, the later is when I click next image, it calls the function here. So what's happening is I'm referencing the images URL variable, which in turn is an array. So you can think of this array here being replaced here, like that, okay? So whenever you have arrays, if you want to access an element of the array, like the first one or the second, you have to do so using the bracket notation like this. So square brackets, index, close square brackets. The index of the element, meaning, okay, which one is it? Because there's many, right? So we got to count from the top, from the beginning. The first element is this one, but that one has an index called 0, right? So we start counting from 0, not from 1, but from 0. So the first element, its index is 0. Now, I wanted to access the second element because that's the URL for the cat, right? So I say second element, but index count from 0. So 0, 1, right? So it's second, think of 2 minus 1, 1. So that's why I have 1 here. That's the index of the element you want to find in the array. Yeah, because all I'm trying to do is replace what we had before with the same thing, but accessing from the array. We had this before, right? I just wanted to access from this array instead of hard coding or writing explicitly there. Now, once we got the second element, now we can figure out a mechanism to keep changing or alternating the images, right? I could have another image. Let me add another image here to the, let me find another image so we can add. Let's say I add a third element to the list of image URLs. I just add a third element, okay? If I want to access that, that will be what? Index 2, because we count 0, 1, 2, right? 3 minus 1 is 2. Nice. Now we got 3 images. We want to make it glaringly. If I click next, it's always going to be the cat because it's always changing to the second element. So we need to find a way. Okay, can't we find a way that every time we click, it keeps alternating the number? Maybe the first time I click, it's 1. The second time I click is 2. And then if I click again, obviously it would go 3, but that's wrong, right? But let's just keep it simple for now and just increase that number. So we need to find a way of doing that. So we can actually come here outside the function and make a variable to hold the index of the next element. Okay, let's say current index, that's the name of the variable. I'm going to assign a number. I'm going to say 0, okay? So this is going to represent, okay, in the images URL, right now the selected image is the one of the index 0. So this is a variable. Now this variable, every time I click, I want to change the index. The next time I click is going to be 1, and then 2, and so on. Now, because it's a variable that changes value over time, it's not a const. It has to be a let. So we have to write let there because we're going to change it later. Now, every time I click next image, I need to do the following. I take whatever current index is, right? This case is 0. I need to add 1 to it, so plus 1. Now, I need to make the new current index to be 1 more than the previous. So I can say current index equals that. So what is it doing? Okay, the first time we click, what's the value of current index? That's 0, right? We always read these things from the right, okay, in this case. So it's 0. So 0 plus 1 is 1. So 1 becomes the new value for current index. Because remember, when you have equal sign, whatever's on the right goes to be stored on the left. So current index is redefined as 1 when we click. Okay, let me revert that. This is what this means right here. Now, once we have this new value, we can use it as the index here. Instead of 1, I can say current index, because that in itself, the first time is going to be 1, right? So I click run, click next image, it still changes. You can see current index internally is going to be 1. So if I click next image again, it should be changed to the elephant because the current index will come here. Okay, current index is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. Therefore, the new value for current index is 2. Now 2 goes into what is here. So I select image URLs 2, which means the third element, right? Because we got to count from 0. And it takes the URL for the elephant and places it here and sets the new source. Let me revert my code to what it was before. There you go. Okay, click next image, elephant. Now the elephant's like too big. Maybe I want to define a height for the image here. So, oops, maybe I liked 100 better. Anyway, just for the sake of not having too big there. So you can always have the same. Now, one thing I didn't teach you yet is if I click next image, what's going to happen? Somebody guess? It's on the third image right now. Current index should be 0, 1, 2, right? What happens if I click next? Okay, if I click next, what would be the new value for current index? If current index is 2 right now. It's not going to go back to 0, right? Because we're saying plus 1 here. So if current index is 0, 1, 2, it's 2. Plus 1 is 3. So if I click next image, it's going to be 3. Oops. Now, if I place 3 here, there's no such thing, no fourth, right? Always plus 1 if you want to find out what element. I can count 0, 1, 2, and then there's no fourth element in the list. Therefore, it's like, okay, I don't find anything here. Undefined. So there's no image. How can we go back to the first one? Well, we have to reset current index to what? To 0, right? That's the problem to solve that. But how would we know? Well, there are many ways to go about this, okay? I don't know if you know about the module. Let me just quickly do it, and then we will end this lecture. If you do division, I don't know if you know about module, this percent operator here. Module, like you divide by something and take the remainder. If I do 1 divided by 3, the remainder is 1. 2 divided by 3 is 2. But 3 divided by 3, the remainder is 0. And if I do 4, 1, 5 is 2, 6, 0. Oh, you can see it always becomes 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, which is perfectly what we want. It keeps, 0, 1, 2, then goes back to 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. This is one way we can do this. So for this mathematical operation here, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to module with, in this case, it's 3, right? But I could add many elements here. If I do that, like I add another one, that's no longer 3 here. It had to be to 5, right? So in order for us to not have to hard code the number there, I'm going to say, okay, this is basically the length or number of elements of the array. So I can say image URLs dot length here. And that will always be the exact number of elements. No matter if I place 4 or 5 or 6, it's always going to replace here with that number. So I don't have to hard code it. If I do it this way, it goes back. Elephant, dog, cat. Elephant, go back to 0. Dog, cat, elephant, go back to 0. All right? So that's the power of the module operator. Just divide and take the remainder. The remainder will always be within 0, 1, 2, repeating as, as the index increases. Okay, so that's the image gallery. And I challenge you to do the back button by yourself at home. It's basically taking current index, subtracting 1, very similar, subtract 1, but then you got to be careful. Just do that one, subtract 1. Once you've solved that, you can do the going back from, if I put -1 or whatever, how would you solve that problem? That one is easy to do. Just check if it's less than 0, you can go back. And actually, if you click back, do you want to go to the last or you want to stop? There's 2 ways, right? If you want to go back to the last, you can check if it's less than 0, the current index. You can set the current index to the last element index, which is what? Image URLs dot length -1. Image URL dot length -1. So these are my tips for you if you want to try the back button. So that's it. Thank you so much. I'll see you on the next one.